Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Sad Clown Paradox. And I'm going to revisit the Phil Hartman murder, which happened in the wee hours of the early morning of May 29th, 1998. That was a Friday morning. And Phil Hartman was shot 3 times from a .38 caliber pistol, a supposedly four-barrel pistol. He was shot 3 times. He was shot in his chest, through his arm into his chest. He was shot in his neck, and then he was shot right between the eyeballs in his forehead, in the center of his forehead, just above the bridge of his nose. Kind of execution style, right? And allegedly this was done by his third wife, Vicky Jo Amdahl, who goes by Bryn. Nobody in these Hollywood stories ever uses their real names. Anyway, so Bryn Amdahl Hartman, who it was rumored they were discussing divorce, or threatening divorce, but I don't believe there were any actual filings at the time of the murder. They've been married 9 years. Like I said, that was Phil Hartman's third marriage. It was his longest marriage. It was Bryn Amdahl's second marriage. And she allegedly had a cocaine problem. She took Pfizer's Zoloft antidepressant, which allegedly she received from her children's psychiatrist. She had 2 children with Phil Hartman. She had a son, Sean, age 9, and a daughter, Burgeon, age 6, at the time of the murder. And one of those 2 children was seeing a psychiatrist who admitted giving Byrne antidepressants. Subsequently, after the murder, there was a lawsuit filed against Pfizer and Zoloft for being responsible for the death of Phil Hartman and Vicky Jo Amdahl, known as Byrne, or Bryn, B-R-Y-N-N, Bryn Amdahl Hartman. I'll circle back to the facts and circumstances that had transpired on the Thursday leading up to the murder of Phil Hartman in a moment, but I wanted you to know the only reason we know who Phil Hartman is, who's a Canadian who came out to California to Mar Vista, CIA Mar Vista. The only reason we know who he is because he appeared on the ABC dating game. The dating game. Remember the dating game? That was a Disney product. Disney ABC. Yes, let me remind you how fake the dating game is. The dating game is a concept whereby the producers find women and men who are unmarried who would like to go for a date. Sponsored by ABC. So it's a paid gig, right? And Jim Lang was the first host of the dating game. It's had many iterations over the years. It is a Chuck Barris, the Jewish fellow from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Chuck Barris of The Gong Show. He created the dating game. Yeah, but what I want you to know is that these quiz shows that you see on television, you know, whether it's Hollywood Squares with Paul Lynde, or whether it's, the quiz show, The Pyramid, or some kind of, trivia contest, they're all rigged, okay? They're rigged. The shows are rigged. The producers know who's going to win the show before the show is taped. Get it? Just like your favorite music artists, like Chicago, or Carole Klein King, or Neil Young, or Van Halen, they're fake too. It has nothing to do with whether they can play their instruments. Most of the people who are appearing on television can juggle, they can dance, they can play the piano. It's nothing to do with that. I'm not saying that they can't perform entertainment. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they don't decide the lyrics to their songs. They don't put their melodies together. They're under adult supervision 24/7, and I mean 24/7. I mean not only the time that they appear on the Ed Sullivan Show or on American Bandstand with the stupid interviews with the host of American Bandstand that we all knew and loved, right? They are reading a script all the way. I don't care if your name is Grace Slick or Janis Joplin, or you're on the Dick Cavett Show, or the Merv Griffin Show, or the Mike Douglas Show, or any number of these phony fake Tom Schneider shows, or the David Letterman Show, or the Johnny Carson / NBC Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. It's not his show. That was not Johnny Carson's show. It's not David Letterman's show. It belongs to CBS and NBC. NBC owns the Tonight Show. Doesn't belong to Jay Leno. Doesn't belong to Johnny Carson. They're employees. They can get kicked to the curb subject to their contract. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is the dating game featured Phil Hartman. But some other people that you may have heard of that appeared on the dating game as if they were, eager to get a date was Farrah Fawcett. Like she had a problem getting a date. Suzanne Summers, Yvonne Craig, Lindsay Wagner, who went on to become Superwoman, Leif Garrett, Tom Selleck, the hunk, Tom Selleck, member of his show in Hawaii, in Honolulu, Hawaii, Magnum PI, Tom Selleck, Lee Majors, the $6 million man, he appeared as a contestant on the dating game. Yes, he did, in the early 60s and 70s. Other contestants that you may have heard of was the Carpenters. Yes, Karen Carpenter appeared as a contestant on the dating game, along with Michael Richards, Joanna Cameron, Andy Kaufman, for God's sakes, John Ritter, Burt Reynolds, Steve Martin, who is a sad clown himself, Steve Martin, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the steroid beauty queen, fake gubernator of California. He appeared as a contestant on the dating game. And guess who else? A serial killer by the name of Rodney Alcala. He appeared as a contestant on the dating game. They had a serial killer, a convicted serial killer, went on to become a convicted serial killer, who appeared as a contestant on the dating game. Other people less likely that you have heard of was Michael Jackson. He was a contestant on the dating game. The king of pop. Dusty Springfield, who I believe is lesbian. Ron Howard, little Ronnie Howard, who went on to be a producer of Apollo 13. Maureen McCormick from the Brady Bunch. Barry Williams from the Brady Bunch. Sally Fields from the Flying Nun. Richard Dawson from Hogan's Heroes, and went on to become a quiz show host himself. Jay North of Lost in Space, and the homosexual Paul Lynde. He appeared as a contestant on the dating game, even though he was a homosexual. But he was presenting himself as a heterosexual. That's how fake the show is. Anyway, that's where Phil Hartman was introduced into television. He then went on to Saturday Night Live in New York at the Rockefeller Center. And NBC gave him his own television show. They promised him the Phil Show. That didn't work out, so then they did what's called this radio show. I'm trying to think of the name of that in a second. Phil Hartman was given a show from 1995 to 1998 entitled News Radio. And the only reason that television show didn't continue is that Phil Hartman got shot in his forehead right between his eyes on May 29th, 1998. Otherwise, they would have been in their 5th season. Joe Rogan was on that show, and allegedly Phil Hartman was paid at that time $50,000 per show, which is about $100,000 per show today. It's a little misleading because I don't know if they deducted extra things from NBC for Phil Hartman. I don't really know how the mechanics work, but they like to throw around that he was paid $50,000 a show. Who cares? I'm sure the house that he lived in was free. It's a Killbox house, by the way. It's completely encompassed by a steel fence. No one's getting on that property without the surveillance cameras catching you. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that Phil Hartman Grew up in a CI neighborhood called Mar Vista. That is where Karen Lamb lived. Karen Perk Lamb, who was briefly married to Robert Lamb of The Big Thing, Chicago. She was briefly married twice to Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, who was killed at Marina del Rey, which is walking distance from Mar Vista. Mar Vista is a very small place. Karen Perk Lamb was living in the same house that William Wyndon lived in. William Wyndon appeared in the first Columbo pilot, where Gene Barry, the Jewish psychiatrist, was in there, and William Wyndon, who lived in the home in Mar Vista that Karen Perk Lamb lived in, which is in close proximity to where Phil Hartman eventually lived. Karen Lamb comes in and out. She's implicated in the Terry Kath murder in Woodland Hills, 7 miles from Phil Hartman's house. She's implicated in the murder of Dennis Wilson. She is injected into the story of Jose and Kitty Menendez in Beverly Hills. That's 3 murders, people, that Robert Lamb's ex-wife was involved with. She's dead. She died at like age 40, 42 or something. Very strange. And this Phil Hartman murder is very strange also. It does appear that Vicky Joe Amdahl did murder Phil Hartman whilst he was sleeping in his bed. Although the execution style shot between his eyeballs above his bridge of his nose, that is something that's kind of professional. But the facts and circumstances do not support the idea that there were some killers that came into the home, committed the crime, and then framed Bryn, which wouldn't have been that difficult were it not for the fact that she sort of kind of has an alibi witness, Ron Douglas, who's a former lover of hers. She's a 16-year relationship with Ron Douglas, who, what a surprise, lives over by William Shatner in Studio City. Remember, William Shatner had a little problem with his third wife, who was drowned at the bottom of a swimming pool at 3600 Barry Drive in Studio City? Well, Ron Douglas lives near there. Of course! Now, you remember Noreen Kidd Shatner hadn't been killed yet. She gets killed in 1999 on Sharon Tate's anniversary death date, August 9th, 1999. William Shatner's third wife gets drowned in a swimming pool 1 year and 3 months after Phil Hartman and Vicky Joe Amdahl are killed in Encino, which is 11 miles away, 20-minute drive, door to door from William Shatner's house to Phil Hartman's house, about 22 minutes, depending on if you hit a stoplight or not. All right, so Phil Hartman is rumored to perhaps be having an affair with some woman. It's rumored that it might be Jan Hooks from Saturday Night Live. Jan Hooks herself dies at age 56, 57, supposedly of throat cancer. But so she spent a lot of time with Phil Hartman because, you see, when you get a deal in Hollywood, they work you crazy. You work crazy hours. So the only people that you could really spend time with and have a relationship with would be your coworkers. This explains why Zsa Zsa Gabor might have been married 9 times. Well, maybe that's not a good example since she didn't really have a career other than being a 4th runner-up in the Miss Hungarian beauty pageant, right? She's a Hungarian Jewish lady that had no career other than marrying Conrad Hilton and having a daughter, her only child. She had 1 child, a daughter. And there she was, neighbors with Art Linkletter and Quincy Jones and Julio Iglesias. And she has no career. Her younger sister, Ava, had a career on television with Green Acres. But these people get divorced a lot. They get married and divorced a lot. In this case, Phil Hartman was married 3 times. He was divorced twice. He was married to Gretchen Lewis for 2 years. He was married to Lisa Strain, who was a real estate agent. Lisa Strain, does that sound like a stressful name? Lisa Strain, 3-year marriage. Then he was married to Vicky Joe Bryn Amdahl for 9 years. And they had 2 children, Sean and Bergen, aged 9 and 6. Anyway, on the Thursday, she went she, being Bryn, went out to an early dinner with a Hollywood writer producer. Everybody in Hollywood is a writer producer. Christine Zander, and they went to Buca de Beppe, which is a franchise, kind of cheap Italian restaurant in Encino. Buca de Beppe. Whereupon, according to Christine Zander, Bryn consumed 2 cosmopolitan martinis. All right. She then, we don't know where she went for the next several hours, but she must have been snorting some cocaine because she's Energizer Bunny Bryn. She then goes over to her former lover's house, Ron Douglas, who she has a 16-year relationship with. The media refers to them as friends. Ron Douglas lives over in Studio City near William Shatner. So Bryn goes over to his home at 10:15 p.m. and she's over with him for 3 hours past midnight. She, according to Ron, if you believe it, Ron Douglas claims that Bryn left his home at 12:45 a.m. So I don't know if they jumped in bed first or what, but she was over there for what appears to be, 2.5 hours. 11:15, 12:15, plus another 30 minutes. 2.5 hours she spends with Ron Douglas. Then she allegedly drives the 11 miles back to Encino to 5065 Encino Avenue, goes into her home, and finds her husband, Phil Hartman, asleep in bed, and then shoots him 3 times, including the shot to the forehead. I don't know which shot came first and which shot came last. Nobody knows. Then at 3 a.m. in the morning, she picks up her landline from 5065 Encino Avenue, and she calls Ron, who is now asleep, wakes him up and says that she needs to talk with him. So he hangs up the phone, and just quick like a bunny rabbit, the front door of his house is knocking. This is corroborated by his next door neighbor, by the way, Omer Scarpetis, who says he's walking his dog at 3:35 a.m. Well, let me just tell you, as a dog owner, usually you don't go on dog walks at 3:30 in the morning. You might let your dog out if he has to pee, maybe. But that's not what he told the police. He said he was going to walk his dog, and that Bryn crashed into the back of his car, gently damaging the bumper at 3:35. I don't know who to believe here, okay? Anyway, so at 3:35 a.m., Bryn has returned to Ron Douglas's home, and she's wired high as a kite because she's been, I guess, snorting cocaine. And the effects of the Cosmopolitans must have been worn off by now, because it's been 6 or 7 hours since she had those. Anyway, she admits to Ron Douglas that she shot Phil. So he gets in his car, and the wired Bryn gets in her car, and they follow each other back over to Encino, to 5065 Encino Avenue, whereupon Ron Douglas goes into the home and discovers Phil Hartman in his bed, in his bedroom, dead. And then he wants to call 911, goes to the phone, cannot call 911 because Bryn is on the phone, and she orders him to get off the phone, get off the line. He hangs up the phone, then he picks it back up. Then he goes to the door, discovers that Bryn has locked him in the room that he is in with the phone, which is unclear whether this is the master bedroom where Phil Hartman is dead on the bed. And I didn't know you could lock people in rooms from an exterior lock. I always thought they locked from the inside. So it's another bizarro part of the story, was that Ron Douglas is claiming that Bryn locked him into a room where he then used the phone, called 911, which that call went out at 6:20 a.m., which has got to be 3 hours after Phil Hartman was killed. And then Sean, the 9-year-old son, said through the door that he knows where mommy keeps the key. He went and got the key and let this strange man, Ron Douglas, out of the room. So I don't know if Sean knew Ron Douglas or if he didn't know Ron Douglas, mommy's friend for 16 years. But he's the one that lets Ron Douglas out of this locked room. Ron and Sean then go out of the house because he doesn't want to be seen in the same room with the dead body and to be framed for murder. So he goes outside. The media says that the police exited Ron Douglas and Sean and Bergen out of the house. But according to Ron, that's not what happened at all. He said he left with the son independently and the police weren't there yet. So we have a lot of different versions of what happened. Then Byrne, who's been wandering around the house, apparently has a second gun, a second .38 caliber gun, 2-barrel. I didn't know they made 2-barrel .38 pistols. I'll tell you what I've learned about pistols. The .22 caliber pistol, whether it's the long or short slug, it will work in the M16 rifle or a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol or a .22 caliber rifle. You can use the M16 will work, or the .22 caliber rifle will work, and the .22 caliber pistol will work with the .22 slug. Now, with respect to the 9mm, which murdered Terry Kath, you can use the .38 special slug will work in the 9mm, and the 9mm will work in the .38 caliber pistol as well. So 38 and 9mm, even though they're slightly different, they will work. They're interchangeable. May not be the very highest performance, but when you're shooting people at close range, it doesn't really matter, right? So M16, .22 caliber, or 9mm 38, it's the same thing. All right, so what I got here is a situation where Bryn goes into the master bedroom and then locks herself in. Police try to have her come out, and she lays next to Phil and shoots herself in the mouth, and the slug comes out of the bed headboard. I'm not really clear on how she got the bullet to go through her head into the headboard, but maybe that was how she leaned back and shot herself. So that looks pretty plausible and reasonable. Again, there's still lots of questions about this story. It is unclear what drugs that Byrne was on. She seemed to be amped up. She went all night without slowing down. So it does appear reasonable she might have been on an amphetamines or cocaine. But she was amped up. And I just find it disturbing that we have this Ron Douglas. The media does not discuss him. They've deleted him from the story. He's an integral part of the story. He's the one that discovered Phil Hartman dead. He's the one that called 911. And yet he's written off as just a friend of Bryn, whose real name is Vicky Jo Amdahl. All right, so anyway, my opinion is it does appear that Vicky Jo Amdahl killed Phil Hartman and then killed herself. It also appears that Phil Hartman appeared to be a workaholic, like everyone in Hollywood is. And he worked with Joe Rogan in the news radio show. That means that Joe Rogan is in the same cult that Phil Hartman was. That means keep your eyes very carefully peeled on Joe Rogan, because he is not for real. He is Hollywood establishment all the way. And that the guest list, if you look at the guest list of Joe Rogan, I believe 70% of his guests are Jewish and are in the social engineering business. So most of Joe Rogan's content is going to be poppycock, misdirection, and fakery, just like the dating game is and was, just like Phil Hartman's sad clown paradox of a life was. I mean, what other comedians do we know that died under mysterious circumstances? Lenny Bruce, Robin Williams, John Belushi of Saturday Night Live, Phil Hartman of Saturday Night Live. I mean, it is a extraordinary long list of sad comedians. Sad comedians who are not dead would be Steve Martin. Steve Martin was a friend of Phil Hartman. Jay Leno was a friend of Phil Hartman. Jay Leno, he looks like a sad clown with all of his car collection. Pee Wee Herman, he was a friend of Phil Hartman. Pee Wee Herman is a sad clown. Steve Martin is a sad clown. The Smothers Brothers were kind of sad clowns. They got out of the entertainment industry and own a Mercedes-Benz franchise. Joe Rogan appears to be a sad clown because he has to smoke a lot of weed. So we have sad clown paradox going on in Hollywood. Makes them easy to manage, doesn't it? Thanks for listening. Please hit the like and subscribe. Feel free to share my videos. We'll talk soon. Have a great day.